Okay, thank you, councillors. We'll make a start. Good evening, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting of the Council for June 2021. My name is Councillor Dylan O'Connor, and as the Deputy Mayor, I will be chairing this meeting this evening. Firstly, we wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and we wish to acknowledge their elders past, present and future, and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. The operations of Council and the agenda for this meeting are governed by the provisions of the Local Government Act, Standing Orders and City of Kalamunda Code of Conduct. All matters of business listed in the agenda will be dealt with as separate decisions of Council. Thank you for your attendance and your interest, and a very special welcome to the wonderful students of Room 4 at Forestville Primary School who are tuning in this evening. Attendance apologies and leave of absence. Acting CEO.
Through the Chair, I have apologies from Councillor Thomas, Councillor Sewell, and I acknowledge that Councillor Boyd is joining us remotely this evening, and also an apology from Rhonda Hardy, the CEO.
Thank you very much. Apologies, yes, right. Councillor Boyd is he's joining us by Microsoft Teams, and so she will be asking questions and voting. Apologies, that's right. Councillor Boyd is he's joining us by Microsoft Teams. That should be fixed. Public question time, item 3. We have one person who has requested to ask a question, and that is Gary Beard from Pickering Brook. Gary Beard, are you here? Please come forward to the microphone.
Thank you. Just want to ask in relation to the moratorium that the council or someone is putting forward about. We just want to exercise our democratic right here. We're just worried about things happening to our land that we haven't had a say in, and haven't had much feedback from anything. I've learned about this today actually, and I'm just concerned about what motion is going to be put up tonight and voted on by the councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. So are you aware of what motion is in the agenda for this evening?
Yeah, no, it's to do a little bit with what's happening in Wattle Grove, I think, and what people want down there, as against what we don't want where we are out in Pickering Brook, and so I'm a bit concerned about what is going to be put across as a vote tonight, that's all. And I'm not familiar with the whole story, so I'm interested to listen and see what's going on here tonight to see what happens.
Thank you, Mr. Beard. We do have 11 deputations, I think, mostly on that item, so if your concerns aren't covered in that, within those 11 deputations, I'll be quite surprised. So okay. I suggest that your concerns will be covered. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have one question from Michael Ryan, which is in the agenda. Item 4, petitions and deputations. There are no petitions, but we have, as I said, 11 deputations. A period of 10 minutes is provided for each deputation, and if everyone exercised their rights, we would be here for 2 hours. So my request or advice would be if you are due to come up and give a deputation and someone has clearly outlined your thoughts and comments, please come forward and say, I echo the comments or thoughts of the previous speaker, and add any new information that you think is relevant. Obviously, you're free to use the time that you are allotted anyway, so that's only in the interest of being mindful of the time. The first deputation is by Miss Bev Dornan. Miss Bev Dornan, would you like to come forward, please?
Bev Dornan, 28 Easterbrook Place, Wattle Grove. Good evening, councillors and city staff. Agenda item 10.1.1 represents a defining moment in the council's history. Do we protect the remaining 2,445 hectares of local natural areas in the city, or do we open the way for its destruction? Will councillors choose to be responsive, attentive and attuned to the wishes of the community? Or, in this clash of priorities, will councillors focus only on upholding city internal operations? Some councillors may feel torn, but the reality is that making this kind of decision goes with the role. Electors have asked not for a ban, but simply for a delay on the rezoning of rural lands until the council has had time to consider the impact of a recent review of the local biodiversity strategy. Electors are simply asking councillors to become properly informed before opening the floodgates to further irreversible biodiversity loss in the city. It seems to me that the very flimsiest of arguments underpin the report's recommendations. On the other hand, I believe there are 3 compelling grounds for councillors to reject the officer's recommendations relating to environmental, planning and governance concerns. Firstly, environmental considerations. The officer report draws no link between this agenda item and the targets of Priority 2, Kalamunda Clean and Green. Councillors are left to make these important connections on their own. In review of the Department of Local Government, this is a serious omission from the report's authors. The review of the local biodiversity strategy shows an alarming loss of tree canopy, flora and fauna throughout Kalamunda, which it largely attributes to planning failures. The proud announcement of the CEO in the last annual report that, and I quote, "We have driven the rezoning of key areas of rural land within the city," serves to illustrate just how misdirected city planning processes have been in terms of supporting land use practices which militate against environmental protection. To some extent, officers face genuine constraints. For example, many local environmental policies apply only to the 35 hectares of parks and reserves managed by the city. These local environmental policies afford little or no protection for the remaining hectares of rural land, which represents less than 10% of the original mapped vegetation of the city. Only the Environmental Protection Act provides real protection for biodiversity and tree canopy existing in the rural zoned areas of the city. Local policies may be well-meaning and they have their place in relation to the city-managed parks and reserves, but they simply do not go far enough in terms of protecting the rural zoned lands. The review of the Biodiversity Strategy states unequivocally that maintaining the city's current rural zonings provides the greatest protection against further biodiversity loss. In light of this knowledge, it would therefore seem illogical for councillors to accept the report's recommendations, especially since the review has been in the public domain for 7 months now, and both councillors and the public are aware of its key findings. Just 4 weeks ago, the council declared a climate emergency in the city. For councillors to now vote against protecting the rural areas of the city from rezoning, knowing full well that rezoning will strip these areas of the city of all current environmental protections under the EPA Act, would essentially assign this climate declaration to the scrap heap. Turning now to planning considerations. Officer reports are obliged to accurately describe the full context of the planning framework, including the fact that the Department of Planning determines what land use and zonings can occur at local level. Furthermore, this report omits to mention that a state government review of planning is mandated to take place within the next 6 months. This review may not only render our local planning scheme null and void, but according to a quotation in the officer report, it may even impose its own moratorium for the duration. Councillors must see the absurdity of accepting the rationale for opposing one moratorium but not the other. The report also promotes an approach to planning known as spot rezoning. Spot rezoning is the term used by the department to describe the situation where a developer seeks to modify a small area of land in isolation to the zoning of surrounding lands. The Department of Planning actively discourages spot rezoning, yet this report asks councillors to legitimise it, smoothing the way for individual developer applications. Ironically, I note that the report refers to a planning bulletin that outlines ministerial oversight of rezoning amendments, but the report fails to mention that clause 7.2d in the same planning bulletin states that the minister is unlikely to give permission to a rezoning amendment where, and I quote, it effectively amounts to an ad hoc attempt at spot rezoning. This clause goes on to state, spot rezoning is generally not supported given it sets an undesirable precedent from fragmented development of an area otherwise requiring comprehensive and coordinated planning. End of quote. So councillors, I repeat, spot rezoning sets an undesirable precedent and it is in fact the very antithesis of good planning practice. So despite current manoeuvrings, councillors should be aware that any future attempts at spot rezoning as promoted by this report are unlikely to ever get off the ground and may well result in reputational damage to the city. As I said above, this agenda item is a significant watershed motion, which brings me to governance. The recommendations attached to this officer report will publicly test the resolve of officers to address, publicly test the resolve of councillors to address climate change, as you promised to do at the last council meeting. Will you fulfil those promises to the community, or will you allow environmentally destructive land use practices to continue unabated? This agenda item is the key. I urge you to reject the officer recommendations which run counter to your decision to declare a climate emergency, counter to proper and orderly planning, and counter to community expectations. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms Dornan. Councillors, any question of Ms Dornan? No, thank you very much. I'd like to call up Charles Dornan for the next deputation.
Thank you. I'm speaking on 10.1, point 1, excuse me. Charles Dornan, 28 Easterbrook Place, Wattle Grove. On a practice, it's only taken 5 minutes, okay? Good evening, councillors and city staff. It will come as no surprise for councillors to learn that the draft 2020 Local Biodiversity Strategy shows that the damage to the environment within the city has reached crisis proportions. The 143-page report with attachments is comprehensive, credible and clear. It shows the city has protected only an additional 2.2 hectares of land of conservation value since 2008. And since 2005, over 730 hectares of land with biodiversity value has been cleared, included areas mapped as threatened ecological community. It also shows that of the total 23,552 hectares of native vegetation mapped in the city, only 2,445 hectares remain as local natural areas, with most of this in rural zoned areas of the city. Lastly, the review shows that the rate of environmental destruction is accelerating, with native vegetation disappearing from the city at a rate of 53 hectares a year. I could go on, but no doubt everybody here gets the picture, and it is a dismal one. Last month, the Council finally recognised the enormous challenges we face by declaring a state of climate emergency for the city. But have councillors actually made the connection between climate change and biodiversity loss? The United Nations Environment Programme makes no bones about it. It states, and I quote, "Climate change and biodiversity loss are twin crises that should be tackled together. In addition to the direct impacts on economy, society and people's health, rapid advancing climate change negatively impacts many of the world's species and ecosystems, driving biodiversity loss. At the same time, protecting and restoring biodiversity is crucial to addressing climate change." Combine this United Nations statement then with the Biodiversity Strategy statement, that the single greatest opportunity to protect what little biodiversity remains in the city is the retention of its existing rural zone lands. And you'll see what I'm driving at. The point of declaring a climate emergency is to start the ball rolling by demonstrating successful climate emergency initiatives at the local level. That is, positive action in order to reduce the negative impacts of climate change. And yet tonight, at the very next meeting on the Council's calendar, councillors are being presented with officer recommendations in the form of agenda item 10.1.1, which directly militates against both the spirit and the intent of this climate change declaration. Far from retaining the rural land zones in the city, it attempts to open them wide up for developers. More than that, it places councillors in an invidious position. The Biodiversity Strategy has been in the public domain now for around 7 months. And yet this officer report seems to ask councillors to either pretend they don't know about the recommendations in the Biodiversity Strategy to protect the rural zoned lands remaining in the city, and or tries to discourage councillors from making the obvious link between climate change and environmentally destructive land clearing for urban intensification and other unsuitable uses in rural zone lands. Either way, this report is putting the resolve of councillors to the test in a very public manner. Hopefully the resolve of councillors in supporting the climate change declaration at the last meeting will not falter at this first test. I urge councillors to uphold the electors' call for a moratorium, which will preserve our remaining tree canopy and biodiversity, while you determine your next steps in the fight against climate change, which affects us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Dornan. Councillors, any questions of Mr Dornan? No, thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr Dick Lovegrove from Wattle Grove.
Good evening, councillors. My name is Dick Lovegrove. I have resided at 41 Brentwood Road for nearly half a century. I'm not bragging about my age, but anyway. Firstly, I'd like to state a few things. I am speaking on behalf of myself and my family and only, though I have a lot in common with my neighbours who support the same cause as I do, and that we move forward towards development. I have no loyalty to any group or any commercial organisation that might be involved in this, and I have already outlined to several people that I wish to develop my property myself, and spoken to council earlier this year about some of the ideas that I had as regards it, and I'm awaiting a date from Rhonda Hardy when I might address it fuller in council. But obviously tonight's not the night, but I want it made quite plain where I'm coming from, because I call a spade a spade. I am not going to grab figures from any reports or surveys or anything else like that. I am going to say exactly what I feel, I hope, and I will be permitted to. And I was the one that proposed that we investigate urbanisation back when the sub-regional structure plan identified the area in which I live as being urban investigation. And I think that makes it quite plain where I'm coming from. I have not come to council much during the last few years. I have watched it on the system, and I am aware of what goes on, and I watched with interest, and I believe I came that night, where council earlier this year voted that, I think it was option 2 of 3 options regarding development, to accept option 2, which was to allow developers to assess whether they wanted to develop and to fund their own development. I'll stand corrected if that's not right, but I thought it was earlier this year or late last year. Do you remember the meeting?
November 2020?
What, pardon?
November last year.
Yeah, oh, well, time passes fast. Yeah, well, anyway, since then, a group has moved in and I've expended funds to do what I want to do. And now it appears that the people that opposed that want another run at it. And they've attached their wagon to the biodiversity investigation. I claim this is nothing else than a refusal to accept the decision of council by a bunch of NIMBYs. And I don't think it's got anything to do with the biodiversity. I don't think these people give a damn about the biodiversity, except for the fact that it is a tool to help them get their way. And I see no other argument in it. You either accept that the NIMBYs are going to rule and you vote for this thing tonight, or you throw it out. I think it's as simple as that. I could go on with a lot of points that give to the argument to continue the way we are and not to change the status quo and not to put a moratorium on. There's the financial side of it. There's the impost on the city, a city which needs to recover from COVID. Businesses that need to be encouraged to come here because of COVID, to reopen some of those that closed down because of COVID. What message, if you revert back to where we were and pre that November meeting, what message are you going to send to developers? What message are you going to send anywhere? The fact is that you made that ruling. I believe you should stick to it. You've given the undertakings. I'm very much aware that there's a developer in the area and that he is interested and that we can go forward. Are you now going to tell him and myself, back up the truck, we're not doing it, we're going to go into this investigation, which I endorse. Have an investigation. I consider myself far more an environmentalist and a conservationist than I would guarantee most people in this room. I've had a lifetime of work doing it. I'm not going to spit it out here tonight and brag about it. It's never been a thing of mine. I've enjoyed it. It's benefited society. It's benefited the environment. And are you going to throw that out of the window? That people will contribute and treat the environment and the biodiversity honestly? It can be run parallel to this. You don't stop the bus because one person wants to get off. You stop at the bus stop and you obey the rules of what the council lays down. I do not see where there can be any case for this moratorium to go ahead. And I just consider that the NIMBYs have sought another avenue from which to attack us. I deplore this particular group of NIMBYs.
Mr. Lovegrove, I just suggest that you address the matters of the report.
Well, I'd like to tell you why. The fact is that they have used the council to impose cost on me, and it was a pretty low blow, and I think all the councillors here know what happened, so I'm not going to go into the great detail. But they will stop at nothing to get this stopped, to get the development stopped. Well, it's time the council put their foot down and got on with it. I'm going to leave the rest of it, and I hope I have left some time for people to ask me some questions, and I invite questions from both sides. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lovegrove. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Lovegrove? No. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next deputation is by Dr. Alex George, and will be read out by the acting CEO, Gary Ticehurst.
Thank you. So I have a deputation from Dr. Alex George, who is an Associate Adjunct Professor at Murdoch University, who received an Order of Australia in the Honours List announced on the 11th of June 2012 for his services to conservation and the environment as a botanist, historian and author, and particularly in the area of Australian flora, and he's held roles with national and international environmental organisations, with publishment of over 200 botanical papers, whilst being very familiar with the city of Kalamunda foothills. So as I read from Dr. Alex George, presumably you all live in Kalamunda because you like its character. On the edge of the hills, its lack of dominating tall buildings, its greenness, its quietness. I've lived in 6 parts of the Perth metropolitan area, including Kalamunda. While here I worked in South Perth, and it was invariably with a sense of relief that I came home to this place. I still have that feeling of being somewhat special, unlike any other place, even in the Perth Hills when I come home. I don't need to go into the details of the original vegetation. It does not matter if you don't often visit your bushland. It is just as important to our well-being to simply know that it is there. You will never visit the moon, yet you would be totally lost if it were to disappear. This issue is more important than putting money in the pockets of those who probably already have enough. It goes beyond having an environmental strategy for the next 10 years. There should be no time limit. It's important that our natural places be here for as long as human beings are here. They will become even more valued, both for what they contain for solace and for showing what the land was like before we came. Ask yourselves, your consciences, do you want to go into the historical record for having helped to drive some of our biodiversity to extinction? Let further development be on land that's already cleared. You can make not a ground-breaking but a ground-saving decision to permit no further clearing of bushland in perpetuity, so that if the City of Kalamunda lasts for another 1,000 years, people will say of this council, this was their finest hour. Ask yourselves, your conscience, do you want to go into historical record for having helped? Sorry, it's been repeated. You can make not a ground-breaking but a ground-saving decision to permit no further clearing of bushland in perpetuity, so that if the City of Kalamunda lasts for 10,000 years, people will say, this was Council's finest hour.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Ray Fafaro from Pickering Brook.
Thank you. My name's Ray Fafaro. I live in 20 Coral Road in Kalamunda, and I'm the proud owner of a piece of paradise in Pickering Brook, lot 205, Forest Road to be exact. I fully support the City of Kalamunda administration recommendations. Number 2, this motion is incompatible with good planning practice. This motion is driven by attempt to prevent development in Wattle Grove. Item 4, it is totally unfair to impose their wishes onto the rest of the city. 5, it does not take into account 4 years of hard work in Pickering Brook and surrounding areas by my committee, and we are talking 3rd and 4th generations. Most people in Pickering Brook have been there well before the war, who fully support 20,000 square metre blocks and tourism. It undermines the establishment of the state government task force. 7, it does not take into account the support of the Premier and Cabinet Ministers. Number 8, in October 2017, Gary Beard and I presented a dossier to the City of Kalamunda, which was well received and they fully supported. On their advice, they asked us to engage the state government. In March 2018, our Member of Parliament, Matthew Hughes, after a tour undertaken by Gary, Ginny and I, was absolutely flabbergasted how derelict Pickering Brook is. All he saw was paddocks. Orchards do not exist anymore, and there's too many reasons as to why they don't exist. And he promised to take action, and action he did take. And in 4 years, much to the delight of the whole community, Phase 1 has nearly been finalised. Item 10. In our 2017 report highlighted the need for 20,000 square metre blocks, but under strict conditions. The first one was, under no circumstances was bush to be touched. The second one was, in Gidgigana, they've got 5 acres and it's full of bloody horse paddocks. There's no people there. The reason we want 20,000 square metre is we want people to come back to the hills. All working orchards must be retained. And a very, very important item, only barren land is to be utilised. If any of you have been to Pickering Brook or taken tours, you don't see orchards anymore. There's 5 families that own the orchards. The rest, there's nothing, not even a tree, because the Ag Department will prosecute you if you have fruit trees, because they will breed diseases and fruit fly. So you've got to take them down, end of story. And our final recommendation was that all new blocks to be vegetated. So this is a development that says you must plant trees. The reason for the development in Pickering Brook is to make our community vibrant again. It was so vibrant in the 70s and 80s, and now it's a ghost town virtually. We've got no garage, we've got no super value, we've got nothing, just a few tourist businesses, which is absolutely great. Our motivation for subdivision is not money. Subdivision and tourism is the only way we can get more people to live up in Pickering Brook and surrounding, and hopefully we can get people to start up businesses, because up here in the hills we have the highest youth unemployment, amongst the highest youth unemployment in Australia. That's something not to be proud of. And why? Because everyone has to go down the hill to get a job. I do a lot of research, and my latest research concludes the following: that we plant oak trees. Oak trees are best described as super trees that are classified as fire retardant. So by basically planting these along our borders, we will be preventing possibly bushfires from property and building damage. Once established, they need no water. The average, there's about 4 varieties that I've chosen, and their growth is approximately 20 metres high and 20 metres wide. So on a 5-acre block, just doing one boundary, we would be looking at least 100 oak trees. Facts about oak trees: one oak tree will absorb 100 kilograms of carbon per year. One oak tree replaces 24 eucalyptus trees. So if you plant 100 oak trees, effectively you're planting 2,400 eucalyptus trees. In the next 10 years, and unfortunately this is a global thing, we have to plant well over 1 trillion trees, which comes to about 160 trees per person. If we do this, we will return enough carbon to the earth and to the trees to halt climate warming. Now, wouldn't it be great if the city of Kalamunda took this initiative? And we were renowned up here for doing such things. Now, those who support this moratorium, are you telling me, firstly, that you don't support tree planting, that you don't care about our children's employment prospects, and you are totally against our city's economic future and progress? My suggestion is, if you really want to halt these, please go to the outskirts of Wandawi. You'll be safe for about 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fafaro. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Fafaro? No, thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Jane Genovese, representing Sharon and Charlie Genovese.
My name is Dr. Jane Genovese. I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of my parents, Sharon and Charlie Genovese, who live at 32 Judith Road, Wattle Grove. Good evening, Deputy Mayor, councillors and staff. My parents have lived in Wattle Grove for the last 33 years. They chose the foothills as their home because of the rich natural environment, the biodiversity and tree canopy. Since buying their property in 1988, they have become faithful custodians of their land, which is zoned special rural. They restored a creek running through their property. They planted natural vegetation, native trees and bushes. They rewilded their land, a sanctuary for wildlife, including threatened and endangered species. But until this year, we were all quite confused. We could not understand why this council, with its home in the forest emblem, appeared hell-bent on destroying the city's remaining bushland, mostly in areas zoned rural. It became clear what was going on when my parents read the CEO's statement in the latest annual report, in which CEO Rhonda Hardy stated that the City of Kalamunda has driven the rezoning of key areas of rural land within the City of Kalamunda. My parents were shocked to read this. I was shocked to read this because people all over the world are taking climate change seriously. The 7 largest economies, that's the G7, recently declared climate change is an existential threat. So with less than 10% of the city's original mapped vegetation remaining, it is really quite extraordinary that the CEO would seek public applause and be proud of destroying what little remains of the city's biodiversity. What are we leaving for our children, grandchildren and future generations? What are we leaving for the students of Room 4 at Forestville Primary who are tuning in tonight? The city is prioritising short-term profit at the expense of their future. Recent government inquiries into local government show that CEOs wield enormous influence and power over councillors through the preparation of officers' reports. This is important to note because it's an officer's report. I'll say that again. This is really important to note because if an officer's report has incomplete or insufficient information, councillors who are often incredibly time-poor volunteers can find it difficult to make informed decisions. My parents consider that this officer's report reflects the CEO's unfortunate view of land development. That is, that rezoning of rural areas for intensive development is somehow a good thing. It is, in fact, completely out of step with what a local government authority needs to do once they've declared a climate emergency. So instead of rezoning and developing more rural land, the city's local laws need to really be updated to protect existing tree canopy and protect mature trees that are critical carbon sinks in rural areas. The officer's report asked councillors to prioritise hypothetical planning procedures over people's concern for protecting what little remains of the natural environment of the city. This is an extraordinary position given that an earlier council assured a state government review group in writing that, and let me quote this, that it said, when considering development proposals, the city would prioritise environmental sustainability and social benefit over short-term economic benefit for a few. Short-term economic benefit for a few. My family and I really can't understand why the officer's report is asking councillors to leave the way open for continued destruction of the natural environment, particularly when the council has published a report from a reputable environmental consultancy that shows the city's own management is responsible for the environmental crisis we are now facing in this city. So on the 16th of March 2021, electors moved to impose a moratorium on rezoning rural lands. There is no development application before the council that would justify lifting the moratorium. Even if one were to eventuate, our understanding is that the Director of Development Services has informed Wattle Grove South residents in writing that there is no systemic pressure coming from the Department of Planning to cause rushed rezoning decisions of rural land. Meanwhile, it was great to see in an article in the Echo saying this council had declared a climate emergency in the city of Kalamunda. I hope this signals a reawakening of the council to the climate emergency. On behalf of my parents, I urge councillors to reject the office's recommendations that seek to perpetuate the CEO's perspective that rezoning rural lands is something to be really proud of. It's not. The elector's motion puts a moratorium on rezoning. This temporary break gives councillors time to consider the draft local biodiversity strategy and the climate emergency as a whole. These are really, really important things. This is a really sensible move. I urge councillors to uphold the moratorium. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Ms Genovese. Councillors, any questions? No. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Kathleen Edmonds of Orange Grove.
Good evening, Kathleen Edmonds, 72 Valcombe Road, Orange Grove. I'm speaking on agenda item 10.1.1, and I ask you to reject the officer recommendations as stated in the officer report. The local biodiversity strategy process is incomplete and will not be considered by council until the last quarter of this year. Section 5.33 of the Local Government Act states that elector motions passed at AGMs must be dealt with at the next council meeting or as soon as possible thereafter, following the AGM. The elector's motion was passed in February 2020, yet councillors took until the 25th of May 2021 to declare a climate emergency. As cited on other occasions to council, I remind you again that a reputable Australia-wide research study, Where Will All the Trees Be?, from the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in 2020, identified Kalamunda as having one of the largest reductions in tree canopy cover of all local government authorities in Australia in the last 4 years. Please, City of Kalamunda councillors, consider how your planning and your development practices are contributing to the loss of critical biodiversity. Surely, council and councillors, you should be embarrassed, if not ashamed, of the absolute environmental destruction taking place under your care. The following two items appear to substantiate my perceived lack of environmental commitment by the City of Kalamunda. The Urban Forest Strategy was published for community consultation in December last year. So far, the City has failed to bring the strategy back for the attention of Council. The Local Biodiversity Strategy was published for public consultation in December last year. The review recommends urgent attention to halt the accelerating loss of biodiversity in the city. Yet, tonight's officer report says councillors will not consider the review until December this year. Let's consider this carefully. Council declared a climate emergency. The review recommends urgent attention to halt the accelerating loss of biodiversity in the city. Emergency and urgent, key words with similar meanings: crucial, imperative, grave, perilous, yet the City appears to ignore the meaning of their declared climate emergency and take necessary urgent action to halt the environmental damage and tree canopy loss. The review of the local biodiversity strategy attributes the root cause of the city's environmental losses to planning failures. The report says officers will take greater cognizance of environmental policies. Officers know that rezoning rural land removes current protections under the Environmental Protection Act relating to the clearing of native vegetation. And Council knows that councillors consistently defer to their advice and recommendations. As councillors in a Hills community, you should be outraged that the officer report disregards the root cause of the city's environmental losses and recommends that planning officers be permitted to continue on their same path. Last year, apparently favouring economic benefit for the few at the expense of preserving the natural environment for the many, 7 councillors took a decision to facilitate the rezoning of rural land in Wattle Grove South, an area the size of Kings Park and about 1/5 of the city's remaining biodiverse areas. This prompted residents of Wattle Grove South to move the electors' motion at the AGM. I thank Councillors Ritchie, O'Connor, Cooper and Sewell for supporting the original electors' motion at the last AGM. This matter is before you tonight for a formal decision. I ask all councillors, please keep the moratorium in place until due consideration has been given to all the relevant facts. Please reject the officer's recommendation tonight on 10.1.1. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mrs Edmonds. Councillors, any questions of Ms Edmonds?
Not of Mrs Edmonds, Mr Chairman, but I just want to have a question of you and the Director once Mrs Edmonds goes back to her seat.
Thank you, Ms Edmonds. Councillor Giardino.
Is this evening, are we dealing with Wattle Grove only or across the city? I've declared an interest in Wattle Grove in the past, but if this is city-wide, I'll stay in the chamber. But if it's only for Wattle Grove, I'm hearing Wattle Grove most of the night, other than one speaker to do with Pickham Brook.
I'll ask the Director to respond. Thank you.
Through the Chair, the the motion that was put forward at the annual electors meeting requests a moratorium citywide.
Okay, I'll stay in the chamber then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. The next speaker for this evening is Andrea Balfe from Wattle Grove.
Good evening, councillors and city staff. Andrea Balfe, 22 Valken Road, Wattle Grove. I was one of the electors at the last AGM who voted to support the moratorium being placed on the rezoning of rural lands until such time as councillors had had the opportunity to consider the review of the local biodiversity strategy. As councillors would be aware, the WA Ombudsman has oversight of the administrative decisions taken by a local government authority. The Ombudsman makes it very clear that the role of any decision maker at any level of government is to ensure that all the decisions they make which affects the public must take into account all relevant information. I was therefore quite shocked to read that the city officers, as I understand, are asking councillors to continue in their approach to planning when the review of the local biodiversity strategy has shown that planning has greatly contributed to the alarming loss of city biodiversity in the city's rural zoned areas. The review makes it clear that the opportunity to protect what little biodiversity remains in the city is the retention of its existing rural zonings. By way of further illustration on page 16, the authors of the review declare that opportunities still exist to increase the local protection of vegetation on rural lands such as Gooseberry Hill, Maida Vale, Forestfield and Wattle Grove. And yet, late last year, 7 councillors voted to facilitate the removal of all environmental protections from rural zoned Wattle Grove South, which is an area almost the size of Kings Park, as we already know. Incontestable ecological surveys have identified this area as being of immense conservation value. Even more worrying, this decision to facilitate rezoning of the area occurred despite the opposition of 75% of affected residents and without any legal imperative requiring rezoning. The fact remains that despite all our environmental policies and strategies, only 2,445 hectares of local natural areas remain across the entire city, which is less than 10% of the city's originally mapped biodiversity. Most of this biodiversity is in the rural zoned areas of the city. If councillors do not take immediate action, in a very short time there will be no local natural areas left to protect. The Minister for Local Government, the Honourable John Carey, recently said he expects councillors to recognise the community as your key constituency in all decision making. Councillors, your community has requested you to protect the city's natural environment. The overwhelming message in workshops, surveys and council meetings is that retention of the local natural environment is of utmost importance to residents. At the last council meeting, you assured electors that you intend to do everything in your power to redress the environmental loss in the city in order to combat climate change. To fulfil your promise, I therefore urge you to reject the officer recommendations relating to this agenda item and to make sure that you have considered all relevant information, including the review of the biodiversity report, to prevent future environmentally destructive land use practices in the city from occurring. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Ms Balfe. Councillors, any questions of Ms Balfe? No, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Mr Kevin Bennett from Wattle Grove.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Councillors. My name is Kevin Bennett of 782 Welshpool Road, East Wattle Grove. Firstly, I'd like to commend my adversaries on their persistence in trying to derail any kind of future development, and especially now across our entire city. However, this is where the pleasantries stop. And for your reference, it's been my honour to have been accepted onto the Executive Board of the Chamber of Commerce, the Kalamunda Tourism Advisory Committee, the Upgrade to Central Mall Committee, and I was a founding member of Future Wattle Grove. And I'm also a business owner within the city. And like you all, I talk to people. And people have now started contacting me to talk to me. And I can assure you all, with my hand on my heart, the people I've talked to would not want this moratorium across any part of the city. In fact, the message that I can relay to you is that some are saying the city is dying. The banks are closing, shops and small businesses are going broke in numbers, and the last 18 months with COVID has been an incredibly difficult period. Businesses need to adapt, change course, and in some cases redevelop what they do just to stay afloat. Together with the Perth Hills Alliance, the city is striving to become a tourism destination in its own right. The city should be actively trying to advocate for businesses to come here. We should be so much more positive and forward thinking. It's unbelievable that this has even made it to tonight's agenda. I sincerely ask you all, what message is this moratorium going to send out to the wider demographic of Perth? We'd be nothing but a laughing stock, and surely we're better than this. I made a deputation to you all in November regarding the Roberts Day concept plan for Wattle Grove South. And I said then, and I repeat again now, this constant insistence of wanting nothing is simply not an option. It's not a solution, and it's not a viable way in any way, shape or form. It's failed us badly in Wattle Grove South. And now the people putting this motion forward are expecting a different outcome by using the same method for the entire city? It doesn't work. It's plain crazy to put a blanket ban or moratorium across any part of the city. It's a completely flawed concept. But they're strong words, so please let me explain why I think this. I can speak first-hand of my experiences with regards to planning, rezoning and scheme amendments within the city. The city has a very stringent, arduous, time-consuming and, if I may say, financially draining planning process already in place. You need to engage consultant after consultant. I can assure you this process is not for the faint-hearted. We all know of certain restaurants, old people's homes and other types of tourist venues around the city that have been tied up for years and in some cases decades in this exact planning process. It's such a hard process that this itself probably needs to be looked at, but maybe that's a meeting for another day. But with that said, this process is there for a reason, to provide good governance and to follow proper planning procedure. The city officers have already explained this in their report to you all. So let's look at the unintended consequences if you as councillors decide to impose this moratorium across the city. Immediately, where people had high hopes of seeing their property values and investments grow, maybe they had visions to develop their land, whether for business or for their children or grandchildren. This imposed moratorium would put an end to any future property price increases and may even devalue their land. But that's not the worst thing that will happen. The land doesn't disappear, and I do say this with the greatest respect as I've become friends with a lot of residents around Wattle Grove and the city that are going through this exact experience as I speak to you now. As I explained in my deputation in November, the big property developers will hover around like vultures, picking off these frustrated, ageing landowners and at a depressed land value. Then once they have enough land, they will do their own DAP and simply bypass council using money, influence and power at state and federal and sometimes federal level. They have no other agenda than maximising their bottom line dollar value. This isn't my thoughts, but it's what's actually happening right now. This is why I say the Do Nothing Brigades is a completely flawed concept plan. But if you as councillors think this moratorium is a good idea and you decide to vote against your officers' recommendations, then okay. I fully respect that and I'll happily debate with you as to why I disagree with you and why I agree with your officers' recommendations on this matter. What will not be so happily accepted is if this motion in front of us is for an alternative motion to select areas within the city where this could be implemented, as this would be a clear manipulation of the system. And I'm well aware that the Minister for Planning is watching the outcome of this vote this evening. If this motion is not for the entire city, then it should be seen for what it is and simply thrown out. All I've said so far is what shouldn't happen, which is really quite a very easy thing to do. But my very humble solution to this very large problem that simply won't go away is what it's always been: to sit around a table, talk it through, compromise, proper planning, negotiation, be prepared to listen, to give and to take, and to share ideas. I know this has been tried, and I thank Council for trying. I firmly believe that we must keep trying, and until the people that want nothing realise that what they're constantly proposing not only doesn't work, but actually enables the big developers, then we're really not going to progress in a sustainable and economically viable way for all of our 60,000 strong community. I thank you for listening, but I do have a little bit extra to add on from what I've heard this evening. This has already been mentioned quite a lot tonight, and I would like to ask a question regarding the state of climate emergency. How do we ever stop being in a state of climate emergency? Do we live in this forever? And will this be used to stop every and any kind of planning or development application moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Bennett? No, thank you. Our next question, our next speaker is Mr. Michael Fernie from Pickering Brook.
Good evening, councillors, officers of the City of Kalamunda. If I may, I'll start. Councillor O'Connor. I wish to speak to the report 10.11. Michael Fernie, Repatriation Road, Pickering Brook. Councillor, you have a decision for you to support or not to support a moratorium on rezoning rural land within the City of Kalamunda until a local biodiversity strategy is fully considered. The officer's report is clear in that good governance and proper planning practices should enable all applications to be determined on their own merits, not through a predetermined position. An applicant must, through council, initiate an application for consideration. The WAPC is the decision maker. What rights should council have over landowners to block an application without allowing the decision maker to make an informed decision? The application should be considered against federal, state, local government policies and strategies. For a councillor considering to support a moratorium, therefore denying an application to be presented for consideration, would suggest a councillor is making decisions based on their own personal beliefs rather than from a balanced perspective, having taken in all relevant information. One would then question whether a councillor in their role as an elected member is representing their constituents equally, fairly and unbiased. The report clearly states that the recommendations contained within the draft Local Biodiversity Strategy recommend changes to planning matters that may require new planning policies, amendments to the local planning scheme or consideration within the local planning scheme. The report also explains that the resolution is unclear of its duration. How long would councillors be prepared to place a moratorium on rezoning, knowing that policy changes, along with amendments to the local planning scheme, will take months to years to complete? It is stated in point 16 of the report that the city's strategic environmental framework would be considered or given due regard through the consideration process of any proposed amendment application. Therefore, protection of the environment is still fundamental in any proposal under the city's environmental framework. Consider the implications of placing a hold on the lives of the people you represent. It is not just developers that may seek change, but people from your community that you represent. Their lives, their futures. The Pickering Brook and Surround Sustainability and Tourism Strategy is a state government initiative driven by the member of Kalamunda, Matthew Hughes. It is a recommendation for a modest, meaningful extension to the existing town site. It requires zoning of land from rural to urban. You as councillors voted 12-0 to initiate an amendment to the MRS to rezone approximately 14 hectares of land from rural to urban at the OCM 23rd of March 2021, agenda item 10.6.5. Now, just 3 months later, you are proposing to place a moratorium on such a proposal. Your actions tonight have the potential to impact this recommendation significantly. If you choose to not support the officer's recommendation tonight, what do you propose the view of the WAC will be of the flip-flop council of Kalamunda that can't make up its mind? No longer supports rezoning in the rural areas, they will seek to defer they may seek to defer their decision until the City of Kalamunda can make up its mind what it wants to do. The task force responsible for the recommendation included senior representatives from Western Australian governmental departments, Planning, Lands and Heritage, Jobs, Tourism, Science and Innovation, Primary Industries and Regional Development, Fire and Emergency Services, water and environmental regulation, biodiversity, conservation and attractions. Protection of the environment and the rural aesthetics was the pillar informing this decision. If councils are still considering to place a moratorium on rezoning, what impact do you suppose there will be on the 2 years' work undertaken so far? Are you more qualified to make these decisions? The impact of such a proposal to develop a moratorium will affect each and every councillor's electorate, not just the Pickering Task Force goals and objectives. In prohibiting the fundamental rights of landowners to present for consideration an application would not represent, in my view, fair and equal representation for your constituents. Your community must be allowed to submit all applications to the City of Kalamunda Planning Department, noting that an application will be considered against and to comply with the requirements of relevant local, state and federal environmental legislation and assessment requirements. The people you represent as councillors must be given equal opportunity to achieve their goals and aspirations by our local government authority, despite your personal views. If any councillor is considering a moratorium, where was the community consultation? Such a significant decision without consulting the community you represent would be both irresponsible and certainly not showing strong leadership and representation. It is your role as a council to inform your community. As a council, the only consideration that should be given tonight is to support the officer's recommendation. And it's just as a footnote, I'll encourage the councillors, before they make the decision, to draw on point 35 of the report and have a read of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fernie. Councillors, any questions of Mr. Fernie? No, thank you. We have two more deputations. The next one is from Miss Diane Wilkie from Wattle Grove. Just your microphone. The silver button.
I'll start again. Good evening, Deputy Mayor, councillors, ladies and gentlemen. I'll only be a couple of minutes. I've only got a couple of points to make here. Everybody's had a lot to say tonight. I do thank you for the opportunity of expressing my opinion as a landowner and supporting the verbal views of many landowners in the Sharp Kalamunda area. I am referring to the resolution to urge councillors to place a moratorium on the rezoning of all rural zone land within the City of Kalamunda. It may be noted that a particular group of landowners from one ward of the Shire of Kalamunda has been campaigning for many years to influence the councillors in their duty of decision making when trying to make decisions for the betterment of the forward planning in this Shire. And with this action to urge councillors to place a moratorium on the rezoning of rural zone land, it may cause limited judgment on future proposals. My thought is the broad brush of all rural zone land within the City of Kalamunda may very well be a ploy to then suggest an alternative restricted area or ward of particular interest to this group in an attempt to give the view that the councillors are suggesting an alternative motion which will not affect other wards but will impact the ward that this group are actually targeting, as has been the situation for many years. Also, this possible action or alternative motion of changing the area of the moratorium to one ward, if suggested, apart from seeming and discriminative action, may very well set a precedent for future wards, such as Pickering Brook, for example, or others, to be targeted in the near future. I would ask that the councillors take note of the information provided by the Shire of Kalamunda Planning Department. This is an educated and experienced opinion and facts provided by your own planning department. If you disregard this information given, then why do we have a planning department which specialises in this field? I'm sure not all of us are as educated in this field of planning research as is your planning department. Therefore, I would regard their valuable input should be respected. In the past, under immense landowner pressure, the councillors have stood up and made decisions for the best results for the progress and future planning of the Shire. And I can only wish that tonight the councillors can make an informed decision not to place a moratorium on any form on the rezoning of rural zone lands in the city. As has been inferred, this may result in future scrutiny by state government departments, which may make governance by the Kalamunda councillors very difficult and may also cause embarrassment and cost to the council. As has been noted, this is the way big developers work, unfortunately, and that may result. I thank you for your time and consideration not to place a moratorium of any form on the rezoning of rural zoned lands within the Shire of Kalamunda. One small point just off the top of my head has been that a lot of discussion tonight has been about rural zoned land, but a lot of people supporting this, in fact, only live on small amounts of land. So there's a lot of large landholders that have rural land that's quite sparse, doesn't have trees on it, has had horses and cows or orchards or whatever, and is now pretty much desolate. So this biodiversity of trees isn't really affecting on these big land holdings. A lot of the people supporting it actually have come into an area. I mean, I've been in Wattle Grove for over 45 years. So I know the land that has been developed. And where some of these people live, it was originally 20 acres and it's now into small acreages. And it's very nice and very comfortable and nice trees that have been planted with that area. They're not original trees from the area at all because it was all, I mean, we've been through all this before, saltbush and various trees in certain areas anyway. But the trees that are on there now, quite a lot of them are quite dangerous. Widowmaker, white gums, and eucalyptus. And as the chap from Pickering Book pointed out, there is better ways of working towards a future biodiversity and a landscape in planting the correct type of trees for the best result for an area. So thank you for listening, and that's just my opinion. Okay.
Thank you, Ms Wilkie.
Does anybody
Councillors, any questions of Ms Wilkie?
Anyone want any? No. Okay.
No, thank you very much. Our last speaker for this evening is Stuart Chamberlain from Lesmurdie.
Good evening, Stuart Chamberlain. My residence is in Bullitt Street, Lesmurdie. However, my wife and I also own 4 Lewis Road, 12 Lewis Road in Wattle Grove, and have done since 1978. Good evening to our Mayor, councillors and staff. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Future Wattle Grove on item point 10.1.1 to recommend endorsing the staff's recommendations. Our members are ratepayers and landowners who live in Wattle Grove. Our members have a combined 60 individual blocks of ownership between us. At the council meeting on the 24th of November 2020, council voted on what has been known as the Crystal Brook or Wattle Grove South Concept Plan, Resolution and Modified Conception Plan. Members of Wattle Grove and anyone with any form of rural property within the city, especially those in Wattle Grove South, presumed that this would be the end of a minority group who are not all ratepayers, landowners or residents in the city, continually pushing the city to change the way they review land and rural land uses and properties. Those wanting change had options. Those not wanting change had options, including the suggestion of a voluntary conservation covenant. The process to reach this stage cost the city many thousands of dollars and many hundreds of staff and council hours. When is enough enough? My next point, if councillors adopt item 10.1.1, then future Wattle Grove will be making a formal application for this to be reversed. Next point, if the councillors do not adopt item 10.1.1, we would presume that this would be the end of any motions for future changes. However, if that were not the case, we would respectfully request future Wattle Grove be formally advised of any future application for changes so we have time to prepare a response. If councillors do not adopt item 10.1.1 but should look at an amendment that affects our members in Wattle Grove, we would request a deferral to allow us time to respond to any such amendment. As I alluded to in earlier comments, it must be costing the city, and by that I mean the ratepayers, many thousands of dollars, thousands of staff hours and councillors' hours to keep going over the same issues time and time again regarding the zoning and land use. Having attempted to change the use of my own property, I'm well aware of how difficult it is at present due to regulations and restrictions already in place. So I ask a rhetorical question. Can the city stop to continue motions, deputations, meetings, studies, consultations, etc., to keep revamping the same issues with a different name, month in, month out, year in, year out? Not all of us have time to monitor the city meetings, keep updated on every attempt for change and new motions or deputations before the city. However, it would appear developers have no need to attend these meetings for these types of issues as they bypass the city and go straight to the state government. Of course, they have funds, knowledge and contacts to do this. We, the average ratepayer, do not have the funds, the knowledge or the contacts. Instead, we rely on our councillors, city staff to keep things reasonable and workable without constant attempts for unnecessary change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chamberlain. Councillors, any questions? No, thank you. That concludes our deputations for this evening. We move on to item 5, applications for leave of absence. Acting CEO, are there any applications?
No, I don't have any.
Thank you. Item 6, confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. They are of the ordinary council meeting of May. Can I have a move that those minutes be adopted? Moved by Councillor O'Donnell, seconded by Councillor Giardino. Is anyone against? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Sorry. Councillor Boyd, are you in favour of that? Oh, hang on, I'll try it again. Councillor Boyd? One more time, everyone, sorry. Okay. So I've done this. So, over to you, Councillor Boyd.
Yes, I'm in favour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll get it right by the end of the night. Okay. Item 7, by the announcements by the member presiding, there are none. Actually, there is one. Ladies and gentlemen, the city is experiencing a few internet issues tonight, so typically or normally we would have on the screen a running document that shows any changes, any amendments, and also the mover and the seconder and who voted which way. This evening it'll just be a PDF. and that record will be resolved once the internet is resolved. Item 8, matters for which the meeting may be closed. There are three reports of a confidential nature, and there are 2 items that will be dealt with at later in the meeting. Item 9, disclosures of interests. Acting CEO, do we have any disclosures?
Through the Chair, I have 2. The first one is in relation to item 10.5.7. Councillor Boyd declares a direct financial interest as the item relates to council funding for personal development. And item 10.5.6, Councillor O'Donnell declares a direct financial interest similarly as the item relates to council funding personal development.
Thank you. Item 10, we'll move to reports to council. The first report is item 10.1.1, response to motion from the annual meeting of electors. Councillors, any questions of the staff? Councillor Jardina.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like the Director of Planning to give us a bit of an outline of what his thoughts are, some of the comments that were made this evening. There were a lot, and I think for us to make an informed decision, we need to hear a little bit more if we can, if we possibly can, and if we've had some legal advice on some of the stuff that last time this come before council, I was a little bit concerned about the moratorium. I still am. I think it was tried years ago, and at the time I said to our director that to please seek some advice. I don't know whether they've done that.
Councillor, I'll just ask you, so your question is, will the director does the director want to make any comment on what's been said during the deputations? Over to you, Director.
Through the Chair, thank you for your query, Councillor Giardina. The report before council is comprehensive in its findings and analysis, and provides a way forward for council dealing with the annual general electors meeting motion. The statutory planning process provides provision for environmental assessment to occur when proposals are put forward for rezonings. The Environmental Protection Authority is required to assess amendments prior to the planning process proceeding. The Environmental Protection Authority is guided by processes and procedures and its own policies in regards to those assessments, and any areas where there's high environmental value are picked up through that process, and assessment is undertaken by the Environmental Protection Authority prior to the planning process proceeding. In regards to the moratorium proposal, there are provisions within the Planning and Development Act and the planning regulations where should a local government not resolve to initiate, or a local government's council not resolve to initiate an amendment, there are procedures where proponents of those amendments can seek the Minister for Planning to initiate and instruct the local government and the local government's council to initiate that amendment. There are those provisions within the legislation. They are exercised in certain circumstances where local governments do not initiate rezonings. There are also opportunities for proponents to appeal to the Supreme Court to have intervention, and for the amendment to be and for the local government to proceed with the amendment on that basis. There's been some advice that we've received in that regard. However, given that there is provision within the Planning and Development Act for the Minister to intervene, it's unlikely that the Supreme Court would become involved. That's the comments that I can make in regards to the queries that Councillor Giardina has put forward in relation to the moratorium. In regards to decision making generally, it's been put forward this evening by a number of deputations that matters should be considered on their merits prior to a decision being made. Preempting decisions prior to issues being put forward before council and full and proper consideration is not good governance from the city's perspective, and it's not good planning decision making.
Thank you, Director. Councillor Stella.
Yes, thank you. Through the Chair. A follow-up question that was linked there. One of the comments was that we did not, and the planning did not deal with the issue, I think, of the AGM, although they didn't indicate it was in February. In actual fact, it was in March. But what was the time frame? What should we have done in the time frame? Did we comply to the time frame, please?
I'll go to the Director.
Through the Chair, thank you for your query, Councillor Stallard. The AGM motion was put forward. From my recollection, an initial report was put to Council at the following meeting, with a follow-up report being the item before you tonight with further detail. In terms of the timing, in regards to preparing reports, having those reports reviewed through the executive and making their way on an agenda, annual general electors meeting motion having been passed in March, and that report being considered and reported to council through the ordinary council meeting process is rather timely.
Councillors, any other questions of city staff? Councillors will be aware there is an alternative recommendation being proposed by Councillor Ritchie. Councillor Ritchie, would you like to briefly outline the main points of your motion?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I can preface my alternate motion. I won't go into any details. I would say that if the electors' motion had asked for any level of length or a permanent moratorium on rezoning, I would not have been able to support it. However, my alternate motion is looking for us to find a way forward in finding a balance between development and land clearing and the natural environment, because I believe that this has been tipped in favour of clearing over the past decade and does not reflect the 2008 Biodiversity Strategy.
Councillor Ritchie, sorry to interrupt. I'd just like to ask you to
That's all I'm asking. That's
highlight
all I'm saying.
the difference in what you're proposing.
So that's what I'm saying. I am having an alternate motion, which is that there should be a moratorium until we've had a chance to look at the Biodiversity Strategy.
Thank you very much. Councillors, any questions? I'm going to put the officer's recommendation, which is on page 15, first. If that motion is lost, then we'll put Councillor Ritchie's alternative motion. Is there a mover for the motion on page 15? Councillor Stallard. And a seconder? Councillor Giardina. Is there going to be any debate? There will be debate. Councillor Stallard, over to you.
Thank you, through the Chair. I suppose before I start my comments, I'd like to just clarify and correct a few points. I took a little bit of umbrage or found it a bit condescending to imply that we don't understand processes and you know, that the staff put in there. We have the capacity and the opportunity to look it up on the internet, or we have the capacity to ask the staff to explain and follow up. If we don't understand, it's our duty and we should follow up. And I found that a bit of a sad indictment or comment made against us. Some of the councillors were named as supporting the climate one the other day, and yet I seconded the motion, but I was excluded, which is a deliberate attempt at some aspect of bullying coming from a part of the community. Some have also cleared trees on their properties, and I was down looking at one in recent times, and I just thought, oh yeah, it must obviously be for fire breaks, because that's obviously the answer for a lot they've claimed. E.g., one of the best examples was when there wasn't much reaction when they cleared that creek line down along Kalamunda, Welshpool Road, and yeah, and they said it was a fire breaks, and they won their case. But I suppose get back to the motion. Good governance and proper planning processes means that a blanket moratorium denying consideration for a request to rezone rural land in the city is not appropriate. We would be trying to preempt all decisions for future applications, a dangerous precedent appealable to the Minister for Local Government. We have the Pickering Brook town site and other areas of investigation in the area at risk or being adversely impacted. There would be a reputational risk for the city and our capacity to govern if we were to not go forward on this and then take on an alternative, the moratorium. The Biodiversity Strategy will be considered in the fourth quarter of this year, so to tie it up until then just doesn't make any sense, and it would deny some of the people the capacity for natural justice. Future planning and zoning also of these applications will be considered by things. So the biodiversity strategy, and we, as indicated by the director, is saying that and as been indicated before through ex-councillor Fernie, I nearly made a slip there, sorry Michael, is that when we make decisions, we are looking at environmental aspects, and we have to consider those. It's expectation. And I remember we read out the other week, or a month or so ago, of all the different climate change aspects that we've introduced. It's funny, isn't it? I just looked through the agenda today, rereading some of the areas of decision making for money, and we have stopped supporting banks, most of them except for one, who are dealing with coal. And so therefore that's another side of it, plus another 20 other areas that we've involved in. So we are moving forward. We are starting to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. I'll just keep going from there. We would be placing a moratorium on the whole city, yet this, with the canopy cover scenario, is being promoted by a few, in particular disgruntled. And I must congratulate the group that got together and did the work on that AGM. They did a brilliant job. Politically, they controlled it, mastered it, and well done, even though there was only 19 or 20 of their local residents who were involved. But don't forget, 10 to 11 people didn't vote at all, and 2 voted against. And one of the senior citizens and myself were the 2. I think I also take a bit of umbrage at the comment by a very naive comment by I think it was it Professor George? And he said, in all his wisdom, amazing wisdom, to say it's only being developed for greed or for money. There are people who live in the area who do not have the opportunity to work in government departments, have jobs and build up a huge nest egg and go and live somewhere and then protect it and look after it and develop it like I've done. Okay, and if I could have, not too much more development my own, be okay, but at the same time, I've got to expect others who have worked on the land, lived on the land, have had no means to go out there and build up this huge nest egg. Their nest egg is their land. And if they cannot develop their land, or we put a hold on them, or try to stop them, or create this adverse situation, we are denying them the opportunity to develop, to do this stuff. And some of the people have been waiting so long for them to give them the chance to live on the land. They don't even want to subdivide it. They just want to cut a bit off so they can live on it, so their children can take over, and that can't even be done. And so there are things we're looking at, and Pickering Brook in particular is an area that is really subject to this happening, where if we stop it, stymie it, or we create delays, then we are adversely affecting all those people who do not have this unbelievable superannuation sitting there, haven't had the opportunity, haven't got it, and they can't do anything with their land. But, and to say that these people have all this money and only doing it for money and for greed, or whatever, if the implication was greed, but it's for money. It's not the case. And people want to live, and they want to get out what they've put in, and the opportunity to develop. Everyone else has been doing it, but to suddenly stop all these other people from doing it. So it's not just a group of greedy developers, it's people, residents who live on the land. I suppose, why vegetation loss? I better address that quickly before we go too much further. Starting with a small base. We start with a small base. The minute you clear some of that base, the stats it look big. E.g., if I've got 2 apples and I take one, I've got 50% gone. So, and that's the problem with down in the foothills. I remember going down the foothills, and there were dairies, and there were beef cattle, and there were some flower places, but in particular some vegetable growing and that sort of stuff down there. It was already cleared, and some of the people then bought up some of that land and put trees in. Like on my place, over 200 trees on my half acre now from a completely cleared block. So to say that our decision making is doing damage to the climate, it's a little bit of a misnomer. And so I suppose infill has been a key factor for what has happened down there. We have no choice. The government has decreed that we have to have infill to share the infrastructure base. So we need infill. There's lots of other reasons and so much. I mean, come on, if we keep going, our city is already covered over 120 kilometres. It could be over 200 kilometres long. What sort of footprint is that going to be? We need to infill, and I'm not keen on it, but I know we have to have it. And stop this greenfield and this expansion right out there to make this huge, horrible sprawl, which is what we're all going through. Now, fill it in. I mean, some of the areas are really close to the city and we've got no choice. Bushfire safety, I've given it a bit of a hit, so I won't go back there again. But that's the reasons why. We haven't made a lot of changes yet, but the previous mayor we had, Councillor Jardina, has been pushing for a long time, as have some of the councillors in this room, been pushing to start planting trees, to come up with policies to fix the clearing of the land, to make, to replace. Start planting the reserves. I've been on teams and groups planting reserves. We can all do it. Everyone should be doing it. If you clear one, knock one down, then you put one in. We all should be doing something like that. And I don't see enough of it, but we've started and we're putting a lot of funds available to plant on roadsides and all that sort of stuff, okay, and verges. So it's really good. We're getting there. I haven't got much longer to go. It's okay, sorry, Councillor. Excuse me. I won't do the next bit. I suppose we have tried to implement policies that are reflecting a change in direction. We have to do it gently because it has to be sustainable. And if we aren't sustainable, we're going to have problems. So what this has come up with through the planning and through us and that is I can understand where the groups are coming from to stop any more clearing and that sort of stuff. But we are trying to impose our will on future decision making. We are trying to impose our will on private residents and what they can and can't do on their property. We should be focusing maybe on looking at other land areas that they're getting access to and stopping that and coming up with policies to help these people. But to put a moratorium on to stop it, I think it's just doesn't make sense and it shouldn't happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stella. Over to you, Councillor Giardina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I'll be brief. I think a fair bit of it has been covered this evening by the speakers that spoke for and against. The report is very succinct for us to make a decision this evening, and it covers a lot of the areas that we need to be looking at as councillors to make that decision on planning grounds. And I also wish to thank my former colleague, Michael Fernie. He spoke extremely well this evening. Michael Fernie and I are on the task force, the government task force for Pickering Brook. And I'm also chairman of the tourism committee. And I feel obligated this evening to actually speak on this matter, Mr. Chairman. It's to do with the Northeast Sub-Regional Planning Framework, which covers all of Kalamunda, or else I wouldn't be in the room. If this was only Wattle Grove, I'd be out of the room. But it's not. It's the whole city. Look, councillors, we right across, I'd say probably for the last 12 months, 2 years, we have a lot of meetings behind closed doors, and we talk about biodiversities, we talk about climate change, we talk about all this stuff. We all know that staff with us are doing a lot of good work behind the scenes, and we are getting there. We are getting there where our community wants us to be. But I'm a realist. We do need development within our city to be sustainable, and that's right across the city, right across the city. It has been said and mooted from time to time that the reason why I started the tourism strategy was that there were moves or it was mooted that the City of Kalamunda office here could be moved down the bottom of the hill. That got me thinking, what's going to happen to Kalamunda? It's dying, it'll be dead. We need tourism up the hill. So we started the tourism task force, and hopefully we'll be making some inroads with that too, to bring people up the hill. The climate change, the climate change issue, I voted for the climate change emergency the other night because I do believe some work needs to be done. But that evening there was a raft of things that councillors spoke about that has been done. It is being done by the city. There was heaps of them. Now, a lot of people don't know that we are doing it, but we are. So I feel very comfortable moving forward this evening with this report, because I know a lot of work's been done behind the scenes to cover some of the fears that the people that spoke this evening against the report. I feel very confident that we are covering, moving forward, a lot of their concerns. We will get there. No one wants to pull trees out. I don't want to pull trees out unless there's an issue with them, they need replacing, or I have to build a shed or a home or something. So I don't want to drag it out, Mr. Chairman, but I feel pretty confident in moving forward this evening. I've spoken to various staff on this matter and people external. I feel pretty good moving forward with this report. So please, councillors, support it. Putting a moratorium across the citywide is not the way to go. Sorry, Councillor Ritchie.
Thank you, Councillor Giardino. Councillor Ritchie.
How did you know I was going to speak against it? Aren't you just calling for speakers against it?
Sorry?
Sorry, I was being facetious. I thought you were going to ask for speakers against the motion.
I am.
So you will... Sorry.
Sorry, you indicated you wanted to debate it?
I did.
Yep, so this is your opportunity to speak.
Look, at some level it is with regret that I bring, that I am speaking against the motion, because I can see some powerful arguments, and I'm particularly cognizant of the Pickering group. And I've taken a lot of note of the emails, the deputations and the personal contacts that councillors have received. And I reiterate again that should this electors' motion have made any notion of a long-term restriction on rezoning, or even something in the medium term, I would not in any way support it. But what I feel is being lost is perhaps the intent of it, or at least what I perhaps understand the intent to be. But it was rather that it gives us a bit of breathing space while we have a look at the biodiversity strategy. And I consider this as critical given what has occurred across the city since 2008. We know from national reports and city data that the loss of tree canopy and biodiversity has been pronounced. And I use 2008 as a benchmark, as this is when the Shire of Kalamunda passed the first biodiversity strategy, and it was lauded as an outstanding document. The strategy was prefaced with the words, "Protection of natural areas is important in maintaining the sense of place in the Shire." This strategy proposes many mechanisms that the Shire can use to guide development, decision-making and future activities so that the Shire's unique environment is maintained for future generations. Our strategy contained 16 targets. 3 of them, just plucking them out, were to establish regional, ecological and wildlife corridors, to retain and protect the remaining areas of the Forestfield vegetation complex with an additional 10 hectares to be given formal protection, to retain and protect remaining areas of the Southern River vegetation complex and increase formal reserves by at least 7 hectares. None of these 3 targets were reached. In fact, we know from the review of the 2008 strategy that none of the 16 strategies or targets have been reached. The city's natural tree canopy and biodiversity is in a worse position than it was before the 2008 strategy was passed by council. I'm not looking to apportion blame as to why the 2008 strategy and its targets were not implemented. Rather, I seek to stop history repeating itself. If we believe those preface comments from the 2008 strategy remain true in 2021, let us give ourselves time to revisit these targets and to consider the 2020 biodiversity strategy. We have lost 8 years in protecting our precious vegetation. To me, it would be a travesty if we provide over further loss by not thoroughly considering the recommendations of the new Biodiversity Strategy and its accompanying environmental land use planning strategy. I'm not aware of any major rezoning projects before Council, so we have a short period of time to take stock of where we have come from to try and avoid what happened from the 2008 strategy and to find a sustainable way forward. Can we not find a few months to consider ways we can meet the need for housing, economic development, tourism in the city, but to do so in a sustainable way? I ask you to reflect on these comments from 2008. The local biodiversity strategy has been developed in anticipation of future development encroaching into natural assets. This strategy aims to strategically plan natural area protection so that biodiversity conservation is incorporated into the Shire's planning and decision-making processes. We did not do this. Let us hope that we can do better this time, and that for the Council in another 8 years will reflect back with pride on how we found a balanced way forward. I ask that councillors vote against the officer's recommendation and consider the alternate motion, which can buy wonderful time, or buy us some time for the wonderful natural assets of our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Any speakers for the motion? Councillor Village.
Thank you. Just for clarification, to achieve the city's vision for biodiversity, 5 key objectives have been identified which can be linked to specific actions and deliverables. In the draft LBS, which is the Local Biodiversity Strategy, the City of Kalamunda has the following objectives. Number 1, to increase the protection status of priority natural areas in the city, including on local government managed or owned lands and on private land. Number 2, to appropriately manage local natural areas to reduce threats, considering the identified local biodiversity conservation priorities. 3, to increase the viability and resilience of natural areas by establishing buffers and ecological linkages, and also considering the impacts of climate change. Number 4, to integrate biodiversity considerations across all areas of the city's business and operations. And number 5, to achieve long-term community engagement in biodiversity management. So, any planning proposal is required to be considered against and is to comply with the requirements of relevant local, state and federal environmental legislation and assessment requirements. We do not need to wait for the LBS when it was issued as a draft several months ago, as we can already utilise it in a rezoning application. Is this alternative motion seeking to use the LBS as a means to stop rezoning? And if so, how do you think that can legally work? Are councillors aware that the only overriding power over the state's planning framework is through the EPA investigation? So why are we even considering using our LBS to stop rezoning in our city? If we are going to stop rezoning while we consider the LBS, will that mean we are going to stop rezoning while all the actions of the LBS are implemented, which in most cases, when pertaining to planning matters, require WAPC approval, and that could take years? If we do place a moratorium on all rural zoned lands in the city, that is not representing good governance, and it is not an appropriate way to deal with planning matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Billich. A speaker against the motion? No. No. So if there's no speakers against the motion, we'll go back to the mover for the right of reply.
Okay, thank you again through the chair, and you'll love to know that it's going to be fairly brief or very brief. Okay, sorry. I suppose I mentioned in one aspect a little bit earlier about tree planting, and we have made a large difference in that. But of course, a lot of it is more recent, and so therefore it won't count and doesn't count in canopy cover, but it will in due course. So it's not all lost, but we are moving forward, and yet it's a slow process. And some of the developments that will happen, there will be a lot of conditions put on that. I certainly agree with Councillor Ritchie that the previous strategy was inadequate, and I have no hesitation in saying that. But there were some mitigating circumstances of why things went fairly skew. And I suppose one of them has been the advent of fire and the policy dealing with wildfires, and the fact that we have demanded people clear, and I've always mentioned one of the earliest ones we put out, a little bit after this particular time, but it said no trees within 20 metres of your house. Now, people went and cleared 20, if you've got a quarter acre, goodbye trees, and you've got a nice bare block, you might as well be down in the city centre. And so, you know, we learned from all this, and we've grown from that, and now people are starting to change. But by putting this policy in, we are not necessarily stopping tree canopy removal, because all you got to do is go out to the transfer station and look at what happened when we used to have curbside collection, and look at the number and the type of trees that were on the side of the road cut up. It was scary. It looked a bit like a dump for a long time, but it was scary to see. And in one instance, we didn't collect early enough, and it added $500,000 to our debt. Collection debt for trees, curbside collection. So it was just pounding out there from everywhere. So that's one of the things that you've got to be conversant with. And I know that a person was told in the past that they were allowed to clear a 20 or a 25 metre break around their property if it was adjacent to bushland. And they did so. And of course, that would make a huge difference, and what a massive loss that would generate to get protection. So we've got to be a little more conversant of why some of these are happening. But besides that, you're right, we didn't do enough. We had a tree policy years ago. We got told to scrap it by politicians who said that it's not a good move, not a good thing, and it's fraught with a lot of danger and problems. And I can see part of it coming back, but I can see the biodiversity giving us the opportunity. I suppose there are motions that are on the books, even a couple tonight, where we are looking at applying the basics of biodiversity, of climate change, and you know, like the solar farm one we're looking at in the location.
Stella, sorry, I'll ask you to just address Councillor Ritchie's comments.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Okay. I suppose the comment was that history has a habit of repeating itself. I don't believe that's the case anymore, because simply what we have here is a situation where we are more informed, the staff are more informed, and the community are more informed. And there will be a greater expectation, and people watching us, that we are more answerable to what we're doing, and we do the right thing by the community on most of our decisions. And very few of them will escape scrutiny, and I thank some of the people who come in here, and there's a few of you sitting in the audience tonight who are in here, who are keeping us honest and keeping the pressure on us to do that. And I believe we as councillors have the capacity to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself again. So on those grounds, I'd like you to support the staff recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stallard. Councillors, that's the end of debate, so I will now put the officer's recommendation to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Boyd, are you in favour?
Yes, I'm in favour.
So in favour is Councillor Giardina, Stallard, Cannon, O'Donnell, Billich, Cooper, Blair and O'Connor. And those against?
And Boyd.
Councillor Ritchie. Thank you very much.
Through the chair, can you make...
Councillors, we're going to take a 8-minute break, and we'll be resume the meeting in 8 minutes. Thank you.
Can I just... Dylan, so Councillor O'Connor, that's all you.
All good? Silly Dick.
issue back.
Oh. Okay, councillors, we'll get started. Thank you. Councillor Stallard and Councillor Stallard, and thank you, Councillor Billich. And I think that's the only people we're waiting for. Okay, councillors, we resume the meeting at 8:41. The next item is 10.2.1, which is the Zigzag Cultural Centre Asset Management Plan 2021. Are there any questions? Is there a mover for this item? Moved by Councillor Blair, seconded by Councillor Stallard. Is there anyone opposed? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? I'll do this. Hang on a second, sorry everyone. Okay. Councillor Boyd, are you in favour of the motion?
I am in favour.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10.2.2, Hartfield Park Recreation Centre Asset Management Plan 2021. Are there any questions, councillors? There being no questions, I will ask for a mover, Councillor Giardina. Seconder, Councillor O'Donnell. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Boyd, are you in favour?
I'm in favour.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously. Item 10.2.3, which is Tonkin Highway, Hale Road interchange status update. Councillor Boyd, you have a question?
Just want to flag I'd like to move this with a slight amendment when you get there.
Okay. Can we hear your amendments first, please?
Yeah, the amendment's just removing the last 6 words of the officer recommendation.
Removing the last 6 words, which and no further action be taken. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Is there a seconder for that motion?
Point of order. The
Councillor
staff recommendation
Billich.
must be presented first without any amendment, first of all.
No, that's not correct. So Councillor Boyd is able to move the motion and with an amendment. I did actually check this with the Manager for Governance, but Manager, I'll ask you to make a comment, please.
Through the Chair, a motion with an amendment moved in this case where the intent of the motion is not being changed is acceptable.
I'd like it noted that I disagree with that.
Thank you. Is there a seconder for the amended motion, seconded by Councillor Cannon? Is there anyone against?
Sorry, point of order. Can I please have the wording? I'm not sure what it is we're actually doing. Please, can I actually have the wording? I know we can't put it on the
No, that's fine.
up on there, so I really need to hear it, please.
Yeah, so if you're looking at the motion on the screen as written, after the word decision, it'll be a full stop. So it deletes the last 6 words. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Cannon, is your hand up? Sorry. Okay. I'm taking it because you're the mover, Councillor Boyd, that you are in favour. That is carried unanimously. Item 10.2.4, consideration of potential solar farm location. The recommendation is on page 43. Can I have a mover, please?
Yeah, so moved.
Councillor Giardina and seconded Councillor O'Donnell. Is there anyone against?
Sorry, just a question. Did
Sure.
you say the recommendation was on page?
On my agenda, it's 43, but it may be
35.
I've got something on 35.
Oh,
Yep.
sorry, I've jumped
Yep.
across. I'm trying to get through the meeting quicker, it seems. Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. Appreciate that. If there's no questions, I'll put. Is there anyone against? If there's no one against, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? Councillor Boyd, are you in favour?
I am in favour.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously. The next item is the City of Kalamunda Creative Communities art strategy consideration of modifications, and this recommendation is on page 43. Are there any questions, councillors? No. Can I have a mover for this motion? Councillor Stallard and Councillor Blair. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? And Councillor Boyd.
I'm in favour.
Thank you. That is carried unanimously. Item 10.4.1, consideration of a draft business case for a new aquatic facility for public advertising. The recommendation is on page 62. Councillors, are there any questions? There are no questions. I'll ask for a mover for this motion. Moved by Councillor Cooper, seconded by Councillor Cannon. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour?
I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Boyd. That's carried unanimously. Item 10.4.2, Inclusive Kalamunda Social Inclusion Plan 2021 to 2025 draft. And this recommendation is on page 67. Are there any questions, councillors? Can I have a mover for this item? Moved by Councillor O'Donnell, seconded by Councillor Blair. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour?
I support the motion.
Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Item 10.4.3, consideration of tenders for the supply and implementation of a customer relationship management system. Councillors, be aware that any references or questions or discussion about the confidential attachment will need to be moved. We'll need to move the whole item to later in the evening. Are there any questions on this item? No. Can I have a mover for this item? Councillor Blair and Councillor Cooper. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion. All those in favour?
I support the motion.
Thank you. That's carried unanimously. Item 10.4.4, elected members training 2020-2021. With the recommendation on page 82. Are there any questions? Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Ritchie, seconded by Councillor Blair. Is there going to be any debate? No. There being no debate, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
I support the motion.
That's carried unanimously. Item 10.5.1, draft monthly financial statements to May 2021. Councillors, are there any questions? That's right. Can I have a move for this item? Councillor Cooper. And seconder? Councillor Blair. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour?
I support the motion.
Carried unanimously. Thank you. Item 10.5.2, Debtors and Creditors Report for the period ended May 2021. Are there any questions? Councillor O'Donnell.
Thank you. Just out of curiosity, when we're looking to write these debts off, obviously there's a significant amount of library debtors. Do we stop people from accessing the library when they have debts with the city?
I'll refer that to the Director. Oh, sorry, the Acting CEO.
Sorry, I'll take that on notice, Councillor O'Donnell.
I think there's another question, Councillor Ritchie.
That was more just, I had put a set of questions to the Director. Could they please be noted? I think everyone has a copy of the responses.
Thank you. Councillors, any other questions?
Yes.
Councillor Stallard.
Just a technical one, I think. On page 95, item 15, it's just got A and C. It just is that in need of just a rejig, or is B deliberately or somehow missing that I missed what I was reading?
So on page 95, under point 15, there's a list of A and C. Is there something missing from that item?
No, there's not. That'd be a
Okay,
typo.
that's good then. Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Stallard. Any other questions, councillors? No. Can I have a mover for this item, please? Councillor Stallard, and seconded by Councillor Cooper. Anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. 10.5.3, Rates Debtors Report for the period ended May 2021. And the recommendation is on page 102. Are there any questions? Councillor Stallard.
Yes, through the Chair. Would it be presumptuous of me to ask the Director, what would be the projected amount that you hope or you think we will receive through the rates by the end of June, and if so, and does it reflect, or how close does it reflect what we anticipated for the year? Is that a possibility at all in current trends?
Through the Chair, certainly it is. As you'll see by the rates percentage collected, we're very close to what we had last year, and we would expect to match what we collected last year.
Okay, any other questions? Can I have a mover for this item, please? Moved by Councillor Stallard, seconded Councillor Blair. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's
I support the motion.
Unanimous, thank you. Item 10.5.4, Provision of Internal Audit Services, Contract RFT 2009. I think this has another confidential attachment, councillors, so please be aware. Are there any questions? No. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Blair, and second Councillor O'Donnell. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That's
Support the motion.
Unanimous, thank you. 10.5.5, Kalamunda Activity Centre Plan, proposed modification to Scheme Amendment 106 to Local Plan Scheme number 3. Councillors, are there any questions? No, can I have a mover for this item, please? Councillor Giardina, seconded Councillor Blair. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you, Councillor Boyd. 10.5.6, Western Australian Local Government Convention, 2021, Councillor Brooke O'Donnell. Just being aware that Councillor O'Donnell has declared a financial interest. Yeah, that's right. Yes, we'll do that once we consider the item. Okay, Councillor O'Donnell has left the room. Acting CEO, could you please make a comment about one of the things in the report?
Yeah, certainly. Through the chair, subsequent to the inclusion of this report in the agenda, Councillor O'Donnell made us aware this evening that the city has previously provided some nominal training support in prior years, and I will go back and have that reflected in the minutes.
Thank you. Councillors, any questions? Can I have a mover for this item, please? Councillor Blair, and seconded by Councillor Jardina. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
I support the motion.
Unanimous, thank you. Can we ask Councillor O'Donnell to come back in? Yeah, that's right. I will mute Councillor Boyd.
I was going to tell her to leave the room.
She actually has literally left the room. So, item 10.5.7. This is professional development financial contribution request by Councillor Boyd. She has declared a financial interest and has left the meeting electronically. Are there any questions, councillors?
Yes.
Councillor Billich.
Okay, thank you. Can I just have clarification from our governance officer that we are actually reviewing this document shortly? We're in the process of actually reviewing that policy that we've got regarding the elected members' entitlements, travel and professional development. I'd just like it confirmed that we are.
Thank you, Councillor. Over to you, Manager.
Through the Chair, thanks Councillor Billich. All of the council policies are being reviewed as part of the biannual review leading up to the elections, including that one. They will all be workshopped with councillors during August and presented in September for re-adoption with any changes. So if any councillor has changes, let me know and we'll incorporate them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Any other questions, councillors? Can I have a mover for this item, please? Councillor Jardina, and seconded Councillor Blair. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that motion to the vote. All those in favour? And that is unanimous. Okay, welcome back, Councillor Boyd.
Thank you.
Item 10.5.8, delegations from Council to the Chief Executive Officer 2021 review. Are there any questions, councillors? There being no questions, can I have a mover, please? Councillor Blair, and the seconder, Councillor Cooper. Is there anyone against? There being no one against, I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour?
I support the motion.
Thank you. That's carried unanimously. We move to item 11, motions of which previous notice has been given. There are nil. Questions by members without notice. I'll start with Councillor Jardina and we'll go that way. Councillor Jardina. Councillor Stallard.
I'm not sure how this works, but I did say during my presentation that I implied it was bullying, and the member of the gallery said to me, could I put it on record that she just genuinely didn't know? And so I said to her, I'm sorry, I apologise for that, but I'm not sure how. whether I should be stating it now, later, or what. I'm just not sure. But I just wanted to say that she didn't realise, she grabbed names and didn't realise I was part of the motion from the previous OCM, and so she asked if I could just mention it. So I have.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's fine. Any questions, councillors?
It's okay. Sorry, if I can clarify it, you lost there. Sorry, acting CEO. I said in the process that when I was excluded, my name, I assume, was deliberately excluded from being one of the people. I seconded the motion at the last OCM and it was being left out. And I assumed that that was a continuation of some aspect of in bullying and that. And the person came up and said that there was no intent of that and that was just an omission. And apologise, and I agree.
So you're acknowledging it was
Yes.
an accident and
Yes.
moving on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
Sorry.
Any other questions? No questions. Okay. There are no... Sorry, Councillor Cooper.
It's not a question, but can I just say, if I may, to the Director of Development Services, thank you for your report regarding the moratorium, because it was extremely informative. It gave us a lot of information, and also for the background information that you have provided to councillors as well. It really did help in making quite a difficult decision tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. You did actually make that a question, so well done. Any other questions? Councillor
Can I come back? Yeah, in that moment I confused
well?
myself. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to see, in the past, we've had deputations that have been presented at the, the briefing, and then we've said, okay, if you presented at the briefing, you weren't to present at the OCM, and I noticed a bit of repetition there tonight, and I'm just wondering, where do we stand with that, and how do we stand, and how can we address that, or should we at all?
I think their standing orders provide for it, but the chair also has a lot of leeway. And as I said tonight, if we're going to start repeating ourselves for 10 minutes at a time, I asked that didn't happen, and I don't think it happened too much. There were quite varied deputations, but the standing orders provide that people have the opportunity to come and speak, and unless we amend them, that's how it remains. And if there's no other questions, we'll move to questions of which due notice has been given. I understand there are none. Item 14, urgent business approved. And we have the two items, 14.1 and 14.2, to move to the next item behind closed doors. So we'll go to that now. Item 15, meeting closed to the public. Can I have a mover that we go behind closed doors? Councillor Blair, and seconded by Councillor Billich. Is there anyone against? All those in favour?
I'm in favour.
That's a unanimous. Thank you very much.